My next guest is a media professional, content creator, TV presenter, editor, YouTuber, a podcaster, and a motoring journalist. He's known as the Brown Car Guy. His name is Shahzad. Welcome, Shahzad, to the podcast Full Throttle with Dervish. How you doing?
Hey, Dervish, thanks so much for inviting me. This is awesome. I'm great, thanks. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm okay. Just coping with this lockdown, but we're doing it via social means, and
Yeah.
I'm keeping in touch with the world by podcasting. So that's good. Yeah,
Isn't Zoom a wonderful thing?
it is, because I've connected with people all over the world.
Yeah.
Via the podcasting network, and it's great to have actually so many people to talk to. So I'm talking to classic car guys, restoration guys, space professors, which I had last week, watchmakers. Wow. Yesterday I had an RAF pilot, fighter pilot.
Wow. Cool.
She's one of 5 women to ever do it.
Awesome.
So it's interesting. It's a really interesting area, and I like to stick to classic cars and supercars. However, I like all cars. I like anything motorized. I'm starting to turn towards the electric vehicle market, but I don't think I'm ever going to leave the automotive petrol diesel engines.
It's a tough wrench, isn't it? And I know that you want to talk a little bit about the EV market, but it is a really tough wrench, as a diehard, cut me and I bleed octane sort of thing. It's really, really difficult to make that move. It's kind of inevitable. It's happening. I'm sure we'll get into this, but yeah.
Okay, let me ask you a question. So buying a rare car, you spoke about this on your Instagram page, and you did a YouTube video about it. So, and I was very surprised at some of the cars that come up actually.
Yeah.
But how do you go about finding these cars, and what do you suggest is a good future investment, do you think?
To be honest, right now, I would say any petrol car that was even moderately desirable in its day is probably going to be a good investment, because I think that anything that survives. So what's happened? One of the things that I used to do a lot before I moved out to Dubai, I moved out to Dubai in 2006 and I returned at the end of 2018. Before moving out to Dubai, I would buy maybe 3 or 4 cars a year. And what I was following the sort of James Ruppert Bangonomics school of motoring. And I found that really enjoyable and satisfying, that you could jump on eBay and you could, between 500 and 1,000 pounds, you could buy a car that maybe you dreamt about as in your youth, or maybe you read about and you thought that's a really cool car, and you go, you know what, it's now only 600-700 pounds, might as well just buy it, and so I was doing a fair bit of that, but when I came back at the end of 2018 and I thought, let's maybe I'll pick that up again, I found that really difficult. And I think what's happened is because in the interim we've had things like the scrappage scheme, and also like finance schemes, which have made it easier to move into newer cars. Also legislation around taxation, emissions, and all of this sort of stuff. It's encouraged pretty much the car park, or the car ownership park in the UK, to move towards newer metal, which means that most of the older cars have either been crushed or got rid of or scrapped in the scrappage scheme. So the sort of cars that you were able to buy for less than £1,000, they're just not there anymore, and the sort of stuff now is really not worth buying. It's much more difficult. So when you say rare cars, and why I said, well, really anything, is because it's almost like last car standing, last man standing. It's the last car standing, because so many, I feel that it's a shame, because I feel that a lot of great cars, unfortunately, must have fallen victim to the scrappage scheme, and potentially were scrapped, whereas they were possibly future classics. And now it's a case of, well, what's left in the market? There's a great website, howmanyleft.co.uk, which is one that's that's one worth jumping onto. If somebody is thinking along these lines, that's a good one to jump onto, just to have a look and see what's actually left in the market, and then try and find it.
Well, I used to own I don't know whether you know the E30 BMWs.
Yeah, I had one. Love it. One of my all-time favorites. Yeah.
Aside from the fact that car saved BMW's, future, but it's a great car. It's mechanically sound. They look great. They drive good. And I had one. I had a 318 IS, right?
Wow.
E30, red one, which I like. I know a lot of people don't like red cars, but I love red cars.
Oh, I like red cars.
Yeah, so I bought that and I sold it because the gasket went on the engine.
Right.
And I've been looking for one ever since.
Oh,
And I looked on howmany.com, and there's only 100 right-hand drive on the road at the moment.
wow.
So I mean,
That's specifically the 318, is it?
that's the 318 IS.
Right, because there must be, yeah, because there must be more E30s. But I think, yeah, because I had a 325 ISE coupe in blue, and 2-door.
Where did you have that? Here? Was that here?
Yeah, I had that. No, that was here, and that was in the late 90s, you know. And I think that probably at the time I must have sold it for $4.5, $5 grand, something like that, you know.
Yeah.
And now, if you could find that car in the same condition that I had it, and it was perfect when I had it, it would be 15, 16 plus easily. Easily. You know, it's shocking.
Yeah. My brother had the 325iN, and it was lowered 90 millimeters.
Right.
And it was around the early 90s we bought that car. And I remember when they started putting road humps in North London. We were living in South London, but in North London we had a lot of cousins where we used to go quite regularly and drive around and stuff. And there's a massive E30 following in North London, especially with the Turkish Cypriot community. And they love their E30s.
Yeah.
And so when we lowered the car, every time you went over a bump, you would get this scrape. And eventually they got so high, the bumps, I just said to my brother, just reverse. And one day we went to reverse, the police were behind us. So we couldn't go anywhere. They actually got out of the car and said, this is a one-way street, you've got to go that way. I was like, oh no, what are we going to do now? And we just heard this scrape, and we sold it in the end because it was just getting too much, really. But
I know, but those cars are legendary. And when you say, like, you know, the Turkish community I mean, to be honest, like, they had followings in the Asian community, in the Black community, and if you look across the world, even now, one of my friends that I interviewed in one of my podcasts is a guy from Jordan. And when he was talking about the drifting scene and the road to street racing scene there, and he said, it's all E30s. It's all BMW E30s. Even today, you know, those cars are immensely popular.
Yeah, I'm looking for one at the moment, but I don't want to spend any money on cars at the moment. I want to concentrate on getting the YouTube channel up and the podcasting going and business side of things first before I start buying any cars.
I'm in the same boat as you. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So I was looking at cars under 10 grand or around about 10 grand, and I was thinking, what can you get? And I found a whole array of luxury cars. You know, Volkswagen Phaeton, Rolls-Royce Spirit. If you're in that sort of, I mean, you're talking big money to maintain a car like that.
That's the problem.
10 miles per gallon, which is probably what you're going to get out of it. But you can get nice Mercedes S350s. You can get 5 Series BMW luxury, and you know, Jaguar XJ series. You know, you got some nice luxury cars out there.
There's a lot of great metal at that money, but you do have to be very careful because, as you've already touched upon, buying cars like that. See, the trouble is that when I was doing the whole Bangonomics things, I was buying cars, you know, lower to medium end, you know, which are technically not necessarily that complicated, particularly when you're talking about cars from the 80s and early 90s. But when you started to move into the bigger metal, you know, especially cars in the 90s, they started to introduce a lot of tech on those cars. You know, and that's the stuff where you're like, oh, if any of that stuff goes wrong, you know, you can't find the replacements, you can't find people that know how to fix it. You know, a friend of mine just sold an 840, you know, BMW, beautiful car. But again, it's one of those cars that was at the time was incredibly technically complicated, you know, and even now you would need a specialist to look after it. And the cars that you've mentioned, I mean, the S-classes and stuff, they all have a tendency to start going wrong around this time, and when they go wrong, they go expensively wrong. So that's the problem. It's almost like you actually have to go older for the longevity. So, for example, if you're going for a late 90s or a 2000 S-Class, you are very likely to have technical issues with that car. because it's out of warranty, and there's certain things that are just designed to fail after a certain amount of time, you know. But if you went for like an 80s S-Class, for example, and I recently did something on that, that would be solid, because it's a solidly built tank of a thing that was designed to last forever. And mechanically, it's not that overly complicated, you know. So it's almost like you go older to go longer, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah. Especially some of these cars that have got, you know, just an engine and a basic electrical harness. There's hardly any, you know, there's nothing like well, the old Minis have got a choke, but the newer ones had the fuel injection and the thing. And you know, you get to a point where it starts to get overcomplicated. The more
I mean, when you factor in sensors, when you factor in you know, traction systems, stability systems, when you start to factor all of these systems that are now built into a car, it's just staggering. And there's just so many things that can go wrong. And you know, very often nowadays it's a case of, you know, you don't repair it, you just chuck it and put in a new one. So that's not really conducive to budget motoring.
I mean, I used to last year I sold a Porsche 924 Lemans edition.
Oh wow!
So,
nice.
so I bought this car for.
You shouldn't have sold that, because those are going up now.
Oh, don't! I bought it for the same money that I sold it at, so I didn't lose any money on it.
All right, that's good. That's good. Yeah.
So I see that as a plus, but I did want to keep it in part of my collection, because it's a rare car, and it had a bit of a history and a story behind how because it somehow ended up in Poland.
Oh wow!
It was a right-hand drive car, sold to a guy in Cambridge, and then it went to Poland. It came back with German plates.
All right.
And I went and bought it off a Polish guy in Watford, and you know, it wasn't expensive at all. And I thought, I'm going to buy this car, and I'm going to do it up. And at the time, I was doing a classic car restoration course, so I was trying to practice on that car. And I thought, hang on a minute, I've just started out metal work. I don't want to start doing any. Not that it needed metal work, but I didn't want to do any paint work on it, because as soon as you mess around with cars of that age, it was a 1980 Porsche.
Yeah.
As soon as I had a light respray on that body, right, the whole feeling of that car changed. It was like I just pulled the bog, and the history of the car went down the bog.
Well, it's not even just that. It's like cars from that era. You see the type of paint that was used then and used now. It's changed. It's completely different. So now it's all water-based paints. You know?
That's it.
You know, and back in the day, it was you know, back in the day, if you had orange peel on a car, you were like, no, that hasn't been done properly. You know.
Yeah.
And nowadays, you can find orange peel in a brand new Rolls Royce. You know, because that's the nature of how the paint is these days. So again, you know, every now and then you see a car from that era, and you can tell it's original straight away because of the paint. But if it's been repainted, you know straight away that, you know, that has been repainted, because just the texture, the look, the feel of the paint is very different. So I completely understand what you're saying. But you've got a real advantage on me, because you're an engineer, so you can actually work on these things. I'm an enthusiast and I'm a journalist, but I've never worked on cars. You know, that's like, to me, I'm like, no, get somebody else to do that. You know.
Yeah. But what I realised with the whole classic car restoration course that I did was that, you know what, I don't like welding, and I don't like scraping, grinding metal. What I like is, and this comes back to my spacecraft engineering, aerospace engineering background. I like to have a white wall in front of me. At the moment, I've got a classic Mini downstairs in the garage.
Cool.
And it's my wife's first car, so I'm going to restore it and give it back to her. I'm going to strip every single nut and bolt off that car, and I'm going to bag it and tag it, put it on the wall, or put it in a box somewhere on a shelf.
Yeah.
Make sure I've got everything, you know, logged down, where it came from, how it goes back on, does it need replacing, blah, blah. And then I'm going to send the shell off to be stripped, dipped, repainted, sent back to me. And I like rebuilding and stripping cars down.
Yeah.
And I found that out just by doing the course, really. I didn't really get into you know, the whole welding and stuff. And
Yeah, no,
you
but
know,
I mean, if you don't need to, you don't need to. The wonderful thing about being in the UK is that there are just so many specialists out there that can deal with anything that you want, that you need, you know, particularly when it comes to cars like that. I mean, you could buy a new shell for that Mini. You know, that's the advantage, because I think that was it heritage
yeah,
shells that they do? Yeah,
yeah,
and if you needed to, if you found that there was a problem, you could actually buy a new shell for it. So it's not, you know, it's not, I mean, okay, it's not going to be cheap, but it's not, the car is not dead. You know, you can always bring it back to life. And I think that's a real advantage to be able to do that. You reminded me of a story that relates back to pretty much the very first supercar that I reviewed, which was a Lamborghini Countach all the way back in 1990 in Jeddah in Saudi Arabia, which, you know, at that age was like, oh my God, you know, this is crazy. But that car had been sold in Saudi Arabia, and this is when it was brand new. So it had been raced, it had been abused, it had been, you know, messed around with. The guy that had it when I reviewed it was a British engineer that worked with Saudi Airlines. And he had meticulously restored the car himself. And why your story reminded me of him was that he was very, very finicky about the details. And he had a whole, you know, thick, you know, file of papers and documents and stuff. And one of the files was just page by page of drawings that he had made of the gearbox as he had taken it apart, so that he would know how to put it back together again. And it was detailed, like blueprint type drawings. It was incredible.
Yeah. I like to do things in a. I think it goes back down to my graduate engineering days at British Aerospace, where my team leader was like an ex-RAF guy, and RAF guys have got this whole, you've got to do things in order and do it properly and make sure that you follow a process. And I just sort of learned that and carried it on through my career, I think. Sometimes it's a little bit over the top, because I do have private projects as well as my space job. I've got a CAD machine sitting right next to me here where I do a lot of drawings and bits and pieces for private individuals. And sometimes I over-engineer things. So I'm aware of that, and as long as you're aware of that, it's fine. So I was looking at all the cars really, and I was looking at what you can buy for just under 10 grand, and I was so shocked to see Maserati Quattroporte on there.
So you wouldn't touch that with you wouldn't touch that with a barge pole, honestly.
No, I know. But that, you know, car.
The thing with 10 grand cars like that is like you need the 10 grand to buy the car, and then you probably need 10 to 20 grand to then fix it and run it, you know.
If you got a low mileage one though, with good service history,
regardless, you know, I mean, the thing is, like, our Maseratis and Alfa Romeos in the 3 decades or so that I've been reviewing cars, they are probably the cars. And we get test cars from manufacturers. So we get press cars, which are prepared and they're supposed to be good, and they sent to you and they're delivered, and you have them for a week. But it's invariably, it's always been the Alphas and the Maseratis that I've always had the most number of faults with, whilst I've had them just for a week, you know. So you start to think, well, if I've only got this for a week, you know, and it's been prepared for the media, and I still have a fault with it, doesn't bode well for ownership, does it?
No, it doesn't. But going back to, like, what turns your head then? What actually?
Well, I mean, something like that would definitely turn my head, and it would make me think for a while, just like it's making you think. But ultimately, the fact that, you know, there's two sides to this. There's one side is like the logical side, where you just go, nah, don't. That's just not smart. Don't do that. But then there's the other side of it, where I would never, I mean, it's particularly in my field, and as you can imagine, a lot of people come to me for car buying advice and guidance and stuff like that. But ultimately, to me, it's like, you know, you can look at the logical side of buying a car, but that's not really why you've come to me. Why you've come to me is you want corroboration and validation that you're doing the right thing. And to me, it's like, well, if that's your dream car, if you really want to own that car, then you must do that. You must do it. I mean, even though it's going to be a nightmare for you, but you must go through that. You must do it, because that's ultimately that's a process that you need to go through, you know. And who am I to stop you from doing that, you know? So if somebody came to me and they said, Maserati, I want to buy it for under 10K, I would point out that it's a problematic thing to do. But ultimately, I won't put that person off. If they really got their heart set on it, I'll be like, go for it, dude. Go for it. Because, when are you going to get the opportunity to get a Maserati for 10K? You can do it. Just do it,
Yeah. Well, I've got an advantage, or maybe it's a disadvantage. I don't know. My father-in-law is a Ferrari mechanic. He's
there you go. Yeah, that helps.
he worked years and years for Jaguars and Bentleys, and ultimately he's an older classic Ferrari expert, if you like. And I will build an engine with him probably this year or maybe next year. But he's absolute pet hate car, right? Is the Lotus and the TVRs, and he calls Lotus.
And again, as you can see, that's ultimately there it is. That's ultimately my favorite car right there. And again, and I know that it could be a complete nightmare, but one day I want to own one, and I don't care. And it's simply that, it's like one day I want, and I'm not mechanically minded. I would not be touching it. I'll not be fixing it. I'm not doing anything. You've got a real advantage there. But it goes again back to that thing where as a car person, if that's something you desire and you want to do, then you must do it, regardless of how much pain that might cause you. But you've got to do that, And one day I'm going to do that, and I know that it's not going to be a piece of cake. It's going to be difficult, but I'm going to do it, because I have to. But the advantage that you have, if especially with the fact that your father-in-law, you said, being a mechanic is, and again, if you buy the Maserati, one of the things, or even an old Ferrari, a friend of mine in Dubai bought a Ferrari 348, which needed quite a lot of work. But he was very canny, because what he'd figured out is that most of the parts in that generation of Ferrari are Fiat parts. So you don't go to Ferrari to get your parts, because you'll be charged 10 times what you should be charged. What you do is you go to the used parts place in Sharjah, and you go and pick them up from there.
It's weird, because I'm not a Ferrari fan, to be honest. I mean, I like their designs. Don't get me wrong. I like all from the early cars up until the recent cars. I love all their styles and but I've worked with people in my industry who have worked for Ferrari as design engineers at the factory in Italy, and they say to me, it's an absolute nightmare to work there. Absolute nightmare. Some days he would cry.
Oh my goodness!
Because they shout at you, and they put so much pressure on you to develop the drawings and get the drawings out. And I've heard other stories of where if you work for a Ferrari, you can't own a Ferrari. Ferrari forbids you from buying one. Why?
Really? That's interesting.
Yeah, I'd like to know if that's true. You hear all these things.
Yeah.
But the friend that I got, the information where he worked in the factory, I believe him. I believe that they're a tough. It's similar to McLaren, really. McLaren, I had a friend at McLaren's, and I've had several job offers from McLaren to go and work for them as a design engineer. I mean, it's one of my favourite brands. But I don't want to put myself through that stress and that headache of working for a company where they're just going to be watching you every minute, putting pressure on you. I'm much happier in the space industry. It moves a lot slower, but at the same time, you still get a lot of enjoyment out of it. So
definitely. Yeah, I mean, if you had the option, space versus automotive industry, I think that's a no-brainer. But anyway, going back to McLaren, and again, I mean, there's the whole story of when Ron Dennis was there and how fastidious he is, and and I've been to the factory, and people are not allowed to have personal. I was walking around there, and every desk was exactly the same.
Yeah.
And it was pointed out to me that people are not allowed to have personal effects on their desks. And
That's
I was like, wow, that's like, okay. On the one side, I can see the logic of that, but on the other side, I'm like, it sort of drains the place of humanity. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I'm just like, you need to have that. You need to have people and passions and all of that sort of stuff. And the thing, and it's like you say, Ferrari doesn't do it for you, but Ferrari, they are crazy, but there's a lot of passion when it comes to Ferraris. And I still feel with McLaren that's missing a little bit. Also, McLarens are they're as unreliable as Ferraris, despite all of the engineering and everything that I've heard from McLaren owners is just like, now they're just constantly in the shop. And my own experience, you know, when they still used to let me drive them, because I think after the first couple of reviews, which weren't entirely complimentary, I think I must have got blacklisted. What was it, an MC12? It must have been an MC12. I picked it up from the dealership. This was back in Dubai. I picked it up in a dealership, took it out on one of my favorite desert roads, was hitting a reasonable speed. I would say not like excessive speed, but reasonable speeds. And then suddenly there was a bang from the front of the car, like above me, from the roof section. And my initial thought was, I've hit a bird or something like that has happened. You know, something quite catastrophic must have happened, you know, because it was really scary, you know. So I pulled over immediately. The rest of the team was with me in another car. They pulled over. What happened? I was like, I don't know. Jumped out of the car, expected to see, you know, damage to the front, but the windscreen was intact. So that puzzled me. And I got out, and all that had happened was that basically the rubber surround of the windscreen had basically all come out, and they had just slapped against the windscreen, and all the glue had basically melted on this thing. I had the car for like, I think 2 days. We had to do some shoots and stuff like that. I basically drove around with my hand outside, holding the rubber strip in place. You know, I got severely handbunt those 2 days, you know. And when I went back to the dealer, I was like, you know, this has happened. You know, this is like this. And I said, also, there's a bit of rubber that's coming away from the door. And he goes, yeah, you know, it happens all the time. I'm like,
yeah.
Come on, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard that if you buy a new McLaren, I've heard that if they haven't got the parts, they take your car, and you could be without a car for 3 to 4 months, 6 months, and you still have to pay the monthly installments.
Oh my God!
I mean, imagine if I put all my savings, all my life savings into buying a McLaren car, and I was paying it off monthly. Say it cost me, I don't know, £1,500 a month. Yeah. I mean, I would be, you know, I'd be really annoyed, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So
yeah, I think you know, people have, you know, like you've just illustrated there is a spectrum of supercar ownership. And yes, of course, there are supercar owners that are just buying the car to add to their collection. And if it's in the shop for 6 months, they don't really care because they won't even notice it's gone, you know, sort of thing.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, there are a lot of people that are buying them from their own hard-earned because that's a dream they want to fulfill. Yeah. And I think that's important as part of the relationship between a manufacturer and their customer to honor that passion, to honor that, you know, that compulsion to buy that car. And if you haven't done that, then you are not going to encourage loyalty. You're going to encourage people going around onto forums and onto social media and complain about, you know, the service that they've had.
So what do you reckon is the best supercar at the moment then out there for reliability and drivability?
For reliability, I think in terms of supercars, you know, you are looking at something like probably an Audi R8. You know, I know that's not probably the most exciting of them all, but I think in terms of reliability, you're probably looking at something like that. You know, I think the Corvette would probably actually, as much as people might denigrate it, you know, because the new Corvette now is a supercar because it's mid-engine.
That's a sexy car, though, man. That's a really.
It's a really. Nice car. I mean, to be honest, there was one owner had taken the badges off and replaced them with Ferrari badges, and nobody noticed. You know, that's how good looking that thing is. You know, and despite people talking about, you know, especially here in the UK, like, oh, Americans, this and that, you know, but actually GM of late have really been building quality cars, and I've tested a lot of their cars over the years in Dubai, and they're really solidly put together. So I would imagine that Corvette would be pretty reliable. So stuff like that. Ferrari is more reliable now than it's ever been, to be fair to them. You know, so in one sense, you know, you can, like the other day, somebody said to me, I'm thinking of buying a used Ferrari. Should I get a Mondial? I'm like, oh, that's not bad because, you know, the values are going up. He said, I want to use it every day. I'm like, nah, forget about it. And I said to him, I said that, you know, in terms of Ferraris that you can drive daily, that era probably started with maybe the 456 and the 550 Maranello. That's when they started to get to a level where they were good enough that you could use them every day.
The 550 is lovely.
Mostly every day. Yeah, the 550 is beautiful, yeah.
It's a beautiful, lovely car.
So those are the cars where you could maybe think about it. You could maybe think, well, maybe out of 7 days, I might be able to use it 5 days, and then 2 days it needs to be in the workshop or something. I don't know. But prior to that, forget about it. A reliable supercar is a difficult thing to achieve. The Honda NSX, I would say, is definitely going to be one of them.
The new one or the old one?
Well, in terms of, your question was reliability. In terms of reliability, I would say both of them. Certainly with an older car needs a little bit more caring for, of course, but they were hand built, they were very well built, so that it'll be reliable. So the new one I haven't actually reviewed. I've heard mixed things about it. I want to really try it for myself before I pass judgment on the car. But it hasn't had the whole the passion that the original one created. The new one has not quite done that. So, but however, it's a good-looking car and it's technically very interesting. So it would be worth trying that. So those would be, I think, in terms, and I guess Lamborghini, because they are owned by Audi, and so they have potentially gone from being the least reliable supercars to possibly one of the most reliable supercars. And I know, and from my experience in Dubai, I know a lot of people have had Lamborghinis and run them daily, and they haven't had issues with them. So generally, I think they're quite reliable.
I prefer Lamborghini to Ferrari. Because of the whole story behind how Enzo treated the Lamborghini guy and how that all went down. But yes, it's very interesting because, I mean, so if you were to buy a car now, for example, for, I don't know, say just under $5,000, what car would you be looking at getting for just under $5,000?
Just under $5,000, that'd be interesting. I would probably stick with a Japanese car because if I'm spending that sort of budget money and if I'm buying something that I need to run around in, then I would probably stick with a Japanese car. I'd probably look at the Civic from 2 generations ago. So that would be early 2000s Civic, that sort of thing. That'd be a handy car around town. That would be for my personal uses around town. I think Minis are pretty good at that level. The original new shape Minis from the early 2000s. Also, they may not be as reliable as Japanese cars, but the thing is that this is their home market, so maintaining them should not be an issue, comparatively speaking. So something sensible like that at that sort of money. There is crazy stuff that you could buy, but at $5,000 you're going to buy something that's going to need a lot of looking after and money. So
I was looking around on eBay like I do every night. I type in classic cars or barn finds just to see what's out there, and I saw this Mercedes limousine, luxurious car. They were selling it for 1,900 quid. 1,900
oh my
quid
goodness.
for a Mercedes luxury limousine. It was pretty good car, low mileage.
It would worry me that. Really. Well, I mean, you never know. You never know. I mean, this is the thing. This is the wonderful thing about hunting around on eBay, particularly, and on specialist websites, is that you just never know what you might find and what you might get tempted to bid on and end up buying inadvertently. But you know what? That's an adventure in itself, isn't it? So, and I wouldn't be the one to deny anyone that adventure because it's, a luxury Mercedes limousine for £1,900. What the heck? Go if it only runs for 6 months. I mean, come on.
Of course. You spend more money getting the train into London for that.
Exactly.
So Colt Classics. What cars would you say has caused a bit of a stir recently?
Like we were touched upon with the E30, I think that all of the modern classic genre, as it's described, is the one to really watch at the moment. And of course, that's always it's a rolling target, if you like, because 80s cars were coming up in value. Everything from things like British cars such as the Ford Capri up to things like the Nissan 200 SX, stuff like that. They're all gone up in value dramatically. And of course, the BMW E30 that we were talking about. I think that that's also now happening with 90s cars. They're the ones to watch now. They're really rocketing up in value. So especially, it's all the desirable metal, the stuff that you think about, that you really wanted. Cosworths, Escort Cosworths, things like that are just rocketing at the moment.
Mm.
So basically, look at the market, do your research, relate to the car. I think it's very important to relate to the car. So, it's always a case of, I've always wanted one. What's it like? Are they out in the market? Are they doing well? Can I find a decent one? Are they going up in value? And if the answers, if you tick yes to all of those answers, and you go, you know what, take that punt, go for it. But I think that the things to look for now are the 90s classics. In terms of cult classics, I mean, there's always like I said, the Capri is always going to be there. American metal is always going to be there. Muscle cars kind of had a bit of a boom about 10 years ago, and they rocketed up in prices. The prices have sort of settled down for the 60s and 70s muscle cars. What I'm predicting now is I think that the 80s muscle cars are the ones that are now going to start to pick up. So we're talking like the Knight Rider era Trans Am, and stuff like that, and the Camaro.
I'd love the Knight Rider car. I would love to own one of them.
What car enthusiast wouldn't, honestly? And David Hasselhoff apparently recently sold his own personal Knight Rider car. I think it fetched, if I'm not mistaken, just over $200,000 for his own original car, and it's done up like kit inside and outside and everything like that. So, but I mean, even that's, I mean, and again, I'm a bit hesitant to put a price on it, but I believe that it's about $15,000 to get and install the kit on a Trans Am to make it look like Knight Rider. So you could probably pick up a Trans Am of that era in pretty decent shape, again, $15,000 to $20,000. So if you want to get yourself a kit replica, you're talking, less than $40,000. So let's say what, 35,000 pounds or something like that.
Yeah. No, that's one of my favourite cars of all time, actually. That is, definitely. But so I guess, what was I going to say? See, as you're speaking, I'm thinking, I need to ask you this, I need to ask you that. And by the time I've listened to you, I forget everything.
I have that effect on people.
No. Because a few years ago, I saw one of those Lotuses behind you, the white one.
Yeah.
I saw one of those. I saw one of those on eBay for about $4,500, but it was really.
Oh, these are rocketed up. These are rocketed up now. Yeah,
it was in bad shape.
The trouble is that there are very few of those around now. The ones that are in bad shape, many of them have been restored by specialists. And the advantage of this particular car, or the Lotuses of this era, is that they were generally simple construction, because they have a simple Y-shaped backbone chassis, and which basically can be just dropped from underneath the car, and the rest of it is fiberglass bodywork, right? Which generally will need patching up, not so much rust issues. The chassis could have rust issues. If the chassis has rust issues, you're really in trouble. But if it doesn't, then the rest of it shouldn't be that much of a problem. Finding some parts and stuff is difficult for these cars, because remember, Lotus was basically borrowing parts from other manufacturers to build these cars, So the gearbox was from Renault, the door handles were from an Ital, So, it's all of this sort of stuff. And some of those can be hard to trace. Excuse me. Fortunately, there are companies that try and do that. There are also companies now that are remanufacturing bits and pieces, especially thanks to 3D printing and stuff like that, So it's always possible to find bits for them. But yeah, these have skyrocketed in the last few years. And, and I kick myself about it a little bit, because it's always been a dream to own one. And I should have done that years ago, because I could have got it. Because you could have got, what you're talking about, you could have got a pretty good one for between 10 and 15,000 pounds. You could have got a pretty decent one. If you want a decent one now, you're looking at a minimum 30,000 pounds.
They've doubled already. Yeah. Do you reckon they're going to keep going up then? Do you think?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Interesting. Because I was at the Concourse of Elegance this year. Sorry.
Excuse me.
Have you been to the Concourse of Elegance?
Yes, I did. Yes, the Hampton Court one.
Yeah. There was a Lotus there. In absolute mint condition. I think it only had a few thousand miles on the clock.
Was that the white one? One of these.
I think, yeah.
Yeah,
It was.
I think I know the car. I interviewed the owner recently. I think
Yeah,
the year before, I think I interviewed him.
stunning car,
Mm.
stunning car. Although I do understand why my father-in-law calls them sewing machines. That's what that's what he nicknamed Lotus, as a sewing machine. But
Yeah.
yeah, he's from a
Well,
Ferrari background.
people say Lotus stands for lots of trouble, usually serious.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I know. It's interesting, isn't it?
But the thing is, like, one of my friends in Dubai used to work at Lotus,
Yeah.
and he used to be there at the time when they were still building these things, and so he used to drive them regularly. And one of the things he told me about them, he says they're the sort of cars that if you let them sit, they will have problems. But if you use them, if you drive them regularly, like pretty much every day, they're generally fine.
Yeah, yeah. And
I
their
only have
driver's car.
Yeah, they're their driver's cars. I only have his word for that, but
Yeah.
I'm going to go with it.
Have you driven one?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
You have. How did it feel? What was the?
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah. Like I know they say don't meet your heroes, and sometimes that's true. But I think we approach these things like we're passionate people, and we approach them with rose-tinted spectacles. So you take, for example, the Lamborghini. I mentioned that one of the first supercars I ever reviewed was the Lamborghini Countach, and that must have been in 1990. When I went over to Dubai, and I was doing Car Magazine, I featured another one. So that must have been 2007. So I drove it. So I get to drive it again. The first time I drove it, I was blown away. The second time I drove it, I was like, oh my God, this thing is terrible to drive. It's heavy, it's difficult, it's impossible to see out of.
Stiff clutch.
And it's actually not that quick. A stiff clutch, stiff gearbox.
Yeah.
And it's actually not that quick. We went to do a shoot with the car in the desert, and I had a VW Golf GTI with me at the time, a test car. And I remember thinking at the time, I was like, that GTI could run rings around this thing, no problem at all.
Yeah.
Having said all of that, the sheer theater and drama and specialness of the Countach cannot be matched. Yeah. So at the end of the day, you balance it off, right?
Yeah.
And you go, well, if I did get this, it might break down a lot. I'm 6'2", so I might not be entirely comfortable in it, and it won't have any of the mod cons and anything like that. Yeah. However, what a special thing! What an incredible thing! I remember I found one of these dumped in Sharjah, which is the neighboring emirate to Dubai.
There's a lot of cars there dumped.
Yeah, every now and then you find cars, that have been dumped, or not so much these days, but before, especially in the 80s when I used to live in Saudi, I found a DeLorean dumped, in the desert. Anyway, but that's a different story. So I found one of these dumped in Sharjah, and it was unlocked, and I had to look around it, and it was generally everything was there. It was fine. The bodywork was straight. The engine was clearly in bits, but everything else was solid.
Yeah.
So I thought, I wonder. I knocked on doors. I spent a day knocking on doors and stuff like that. I couldn't find out about it. I asked my contacts, that might know. They couldn't find out about it. Over there, they're quite strict about these sort of things.
Yeah.
But I was half tempted to have that car towed back to my place in Dubai and just left out the front, just so that at least I could look at it every day. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Even though I knew that I couldn't buy it, I wouldn't be able to run it, I wouldn't fix it. But what I would do is just put it there, clean it out, so that every time I left home, I'd be like, wow, look at that. Yeah. Isn't that gorgeous? So I didn't do that ultimately, but I was very, very tempted to do it. But yes, it's all about the passion, and ultimately you'll make the compromises because of, the passion that we have for these things.
What would happen if you did tow it? Would the original owner one day come back, or what
so over there, technically it would be, it's not it would be illegal. You'd effectively be stealing that car, and you don't want to be doing that in a Middle East state.
No.
So technically what happens, ultimately what should happen, is that the car, once it is left unclaimed and people complain about it, it will eventually have a notice on it. The notice will probably sit on it for 3 months or whatever, and then it will be impounded by the police. And it will sit in one of those impound yards for up to a year, possibly even more. That's why you've seen on the internet all of these pictures of supercars with sand on them in these impound yards. Because technically they have to leave them there, because they have to leave them for a year or 2 years to see if anybody comes to claim them. And then ultimately they will then go to a trade auction. What then happens invariably is, if they're really good cars, then they'll get snapped up by a lot of the guys that work in the police themselves, because a lot of them are car guys. It's a wonderful thing about the Dubai police is a lot of the guys in it, and I got to know quite a few myself, are really proper car guys. They're really into their cars. So that's always a good thing. But yeah, so it becomes difficult to access it yourself.
Have you been to the classic car show in Dubai at the I think it's at the race course, the horse race course down in
well, I mean, to be honest, there were quite a lot of car events that had started to happen, and I've been to every single one of them, and I probably would say that I was probably one of the instigators of those sort of things, because we actually started car meets in Dubai in 2010 along the cars and coffee type model, but it was more sort of cars and burgers, So we started the first meet under the umbrella of Car Middle East magazine. I think it was in 2010 at the Fat Burgers at Jumeirah Beach Road, and 25 cars turned up. And then our penultimate meet, which was meet number 14, I think, 13 or 14. That was at Festival City. That must have been about 6-7 years ago. We stopped doing them after that, and we basically blockaded the entire place with over 1,000 cars had turned up. So at that point, we realized the meet had basically grown beyond what we had ever imagined it to be. So we did one more after that, and then we stopped, because they'd become too big. But by that time, the culture had really picked up, and there were lots of events, and other people were doing meets and club events and stuff like that. So, as media people, it was like, why are we taking on the effort of doing this when we can just go to other people's meets? It's a lot easier. But I'm very proud of what we achieved there with Motoring Middle East and Car Middle East.
So going back to electric cars then, so what do you think that is the future, or are we going to go on to, this is just the middle step and we're going to go on to something else?
Yeah, so again, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on it, because particularly being from the aerospace environment and background. But my personal feeling of it is that it's kind of being forced on us, as you know, because of the 2030 deadline that has now been given, which personally, and I've done a video about this, I don't think is ever going to be met. I think it's a bit pie in the sky. I don't think that neither the infrastructure nor the industry might be ready for it. The industry can manage. If they have to, they can do it. But I don't think the consumer or the infrastructure will be ready for it. And case in point, I'm trying to test more electric cars and more plug-in hybrid cars these days. And just yesterday I returned. I had an Audi A3 TFSI-E, so that's a plug-in hybrid. And I thought I would plug it. I thought, let me do that, because when it arrived, it had a full charge, but that depleted within half a day. It said it had a range of 25 miles on EV alone. I think I barely got 17 miles out of it, and it was gone. Then you can use the engine to charge the battery, but then that uses the engine quite heavily on that. So I drove it around a little bit as a hybrid, a little bit as a petrol car. Then I thought, let me charge it up again. So I went to my normal charging place. There's only one charging place at the petrol station at the end of my road here, and somebody was plugged in. So I gave up with that. I went to a supermarket, Asda in this case, and I thought, because I've seen that they have chargers there, and I thought, let me use that. So I went down there, and then from reading the thing, I realized that you have to take out a monthly subscription to do that. And I'm like, I'm not doing that. So then a few hours later, I went back to the first place, and I couldn't get it to work. I went in the boot. They had 3 different cables. I got the right cable out, found the plug, plugged it in here, plugged it into the Genie Point thing, which I have used before, and I've got the app and everything. Plugged it all in. The app said it's charging. The car said it's charging. Sat there 20 minutes. I didn't feel like anything had happened at all.
Really?
And I found that just tremendously frustrating. And you know how cold it was. And I just found that just tremendously frustrating. And I think that this is the problem with EVs. I had a Honda E. Honda claim a range of 100 miles. I really don't think it's anywhere near 100 miles. I think 60 at best, or whatever, 60, 70 at best. And again, I charged that a couple of times. I've made a video on that as well. And the thing is, it's like, again, okay, yes, I mean, that worked and everything was fine, but it was half an hour of sitting there charging this thing, And when you think
Yeah.
about, I could go to, if I have a car with petrol, I could just fill it up in 5 minutes and I'm on my way again.
Yeah.
There's the whole thought of that. And I live in an apartment block in a flat, so I can't charge it here. There's a car park downstairs. If I had an extension cable, I could run it from my balcony, but I don't think that's a very good idea. So, and also if you do it at a home socket, it's an overnight charge. So it's just ridiculous,
Yeah.
So I think to answer your question, I think EVs are part of a solution. I don't think that they are the ultimate solution, that governments now have jumped on this bandwagon, because it's very easy for governments to do that. And it reminds me very much of, 10, 20 years ago when we were all told that diesels were the answer, and the government actively pushed diesels and we were all encouraged to buy diesels.
Yeah.
And then of course now we're like, no, diesels are the enemy. Don't buy the diesels, so it's like, and so I'm just wondering if we're being sold a red herring again, with EVs. Because especially if you look at where the batteries are mined from, the materials are mined from, how that's all being done, where is the juice going to come from to charge all of these cars? We're talking about building power stations. I mean, it's very easy to say, oh yeah, we're going to build loads of wind power stations in the sea. But that in itself needs resources to do. Surely that's not environmentally that good to be able to use up more of the planet's resources to try and cut down on what you're doing.
Yeah,
like they say, the most ecologically sound car, like they say, is a 50-year-old Land Rover, because it's still going, and it will continue to still go, or a Land Cruiser even, And I think that we have to look at this a bit more carefully and a bit more intelligently. I think EVs are inevitably going to be part of our motoring future. I think that's a given now. There's no doubt about it. I think the infrastructure needs to grow, and I guess it will do dramatically within the next 9 years, because it has to. But ultimately, I don't think that they're the final solution. I think there must be something else, whether it's hydrogen fuel cell or hybrids or something else entirely.
Well, there is talk of hydrogen being the answer, but I know a lot of governments now. Norway have sold more electric cars. I think they've got majority of their citizens now are driving electric cars.
Yeah, that's right.
I don't know where
number one selling car there is a Nissan Leaf, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah,
but again, think about the markets. If you look at that market, compare it even to the UK market, it's a less complex, dynamic market. We have 45 million plus vehicles on the road in the UK. And then go over to America. Oh my God, it's like, and we're talking about dynamics where the biggest selling vehicle in America is a Ford F-150 truck. How do you make that, that transition? That's incredible. And then move over to the third world. And then you go, well, how is it going to happen there? I mean, we're talking about third world where just getting electricity to your house is difficult enough, and having power power outages and stuff like that. How are you going to then tell everybody to switch to electric cars? I think there are a lot of unanswered questions, regarding this. I think we need to answer more of these before we say, yes, EVs, that's the way forward.
Yeah. Okay, so look, I'm going to ask you some questions and let you go. I ask all my guests, my car guests, these questions. So if you were going on a road trip, where would you drive and who would you take with you and what car?
I would probably drive across Europe, because Europe has some of the best driving roads. I've been fortunate enough to do press launches across Europe, and I mean, anywhere in Italy, south of France, all of these areas, just anywhere you go, the roads are just fabulous. Who would I take? I'd take my wife, obviously. What car would I take? It'd probably have to be one of these two, because they're my ultimate cars, a Lotus Esprit or a Mustang. In terms of reliability, in order to go further than I would hope to go, and if I had money no object, I'd probably get something like a classic recreation or a Revology Mustang, which are basically resto mods. So they look like the classic car. The body is the classic car, but in fact it has a brand new Mustang engine, brand new Mustang gearbox, and all the rest of it. So that would be ideal, because then that it would be perfectly reliable.
Yeah. Okay. Have you heard? You just triggered something off with me. Have you heard of charge cars?
Yes, I have. Yeah. I haven't heard what they're up to lately. So those are the guys that are basically using Mustang body shells and building an electric car around it. And that's actually not far from me. It's somewhere here in northwest London.
Yeah.
But they were making a lot of noise a couple of years ago. But I haven't heard so much now. Obviously, it's lockdown, so I'm looking forward to seeing what they come up with.
Yeah. Because they got a similar Mustang to that. I think it might be the same, and they've made it an electric vehicle. It looks quite nice. It looks quite nice.
Yeah, it does.
But I'm not sure about the price bracket on it. I'm not sure how much they're charging for it. I think it's going to be expensive.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Like I said, I mean, if you buy one of those resto mod Mustangs that I just referred to from Classic Recreations or Revology, you're talking in excess of $200,000. You know, that's your starting price.
Yeah. It's crazy because a few years ago I saw you heard of Singer, obviously Singer Porsche.
Yeah.
And
they're very expensive.
I love that. I love that design.
Beautifully built.
Beautiful car.
Yeah.
And bear in mind, I'm an engineer. You know, some of my projects go into minimum 160 million per satellite. You know, up to $1 billion. And I said to the guy, "How much is this car?" And he said to me, "I think it was about 400,000. This wasn't the white and orange one that you see all over the press at the moment. It was just a more of a stripped down version of that."
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "So how much is this car?" He said, 400 grand. I said, 400 grand?
Yeah.
I said to him, and it sounded a bit rude, but I said to him, "Why are you charging 400 grand for a car that I can probably buy for 100 grand and spend 100,000 doing it myself, for example?"
Yeah.
And he said it's all the engineering and all the design and all the handmade bits that go on it and the time that it takes to build it. And I was like, okay, now I see where he's coming from. Now I can understand it. And then,
exactly. It's like when they start to break it down for you and you understand what goes into what they're doing, you know, and it's not just a backstreet garage that's taken off a body shell and put it on something else, you know.
No,
but they've answered lots of questions. They've addressed lots of issues, you know. That's why like classic. That's why I keep mentioning Classic Recreations and Revology, because I know the quality of work that they do on the cars. I've reviewed a Classic Recreation car myself years ago. So it's a very different thing. But at the same time, I mean, you think about it, you're saying 300, 400,000 pounds or 200,000 for one of these or whatever. But at the same time, like you said, you're not into Ferraris. I'm not necessarily a supercar guy. I love driving them. I've driven many of them. But if I was to, I wouldn't own one. You know what I mean? I just wouldn't own one because it's just excessive, you know? And it's such a cliche as well. Yeah. And to me, it's like, well, if you're spending that much money, why don't you take the Mavericks choice and go for something that's stand out different, that's unique, and whatever you spent on it doesn't matter, but it's different and it's special and it's you.
Yeah. That's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for something that's me. And I love going down to London. I love going King's Road, having a coffee and parking outside the coffee place there. And I just watch people take pictures of my cars. And I love that. I just love it. It just gives me so much satisfaction. You know? So don't get me wrong as well. I mean, my brother's got an AMG S. He's got the E-Class AMG. Very powerful car. Too much. It's too much power. I think it's too much. He's got 650 horsepower. And he's looking at driving it to Germany, if COVID allows us this year, to soup it up to 1,000 horsepower. And I said to him, what for though? What are you going to do with 1,000 horsepower? Like, there's not a lot. Even on the track, you would probably want 1,000 horsepower.
No, I mean, basically two things happen with that. Either you have so much power that you can't actually get it to the ground. You know, the car just sits there spinning its wheels and not actually doing anything, which is pretty dramatic, to be fair. Or you then have to put so much electronics onto it to counter that actually it's not going to go that quick because all the power is having to be suppressed and controlled. I mean, honestly speaking, I think for me 500 is a maximum in terms of what you could actually use. 500 horsepower. I don't think you could ever use more than 500 horsepower. Having said that, I've driven Dodge Demons and Hellcats and I love them. So I'm being a hypocrite.
And they're running at what, 800 horsepower?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, fair enough then. So 5-car garage, unlimited value, whatever car you want.
That's always a tricky one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh God! Right now it's so definitely an Esprit has to be in there. A Mustang has to be in there. I'd say both a brand new one. I like the new Bullet Mustang. I have one of those, and probably a classic as well. Daily driver, I get Civic Type R. You know, And then the fifth one, luxury SUV. It's a very easy option to say the Range Rover, and that is a very classy option to go for.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, all right, let's say Range Rover. Let's say Range Rover Velar. Let's say Range Rover Velar. I really like the Velar. I like the shape of that thing. It's really good looking.
Yeah, okay.
And it's not too big for London, so.
Yeah. Okay, and I've got probably the most difficult question I've asked you today. Resurrecting a forgotten brand, so a car brand.
Ooh.
What would you go for?
Wow, that is interesting. Yeah, that is an interesting one. Resurrecting a car brand.
Forget
I mean,
TVR.
obviously, that's trying to be done, isn't it?
Yeah.
Obviously, there was a lot of cult following and love for quite a charismatic brand, which was, of course, the Saab brand. So I think that might be a good one to do, to bring back Saab in some form or another.
Yeah, interesting.
Especially, and I think that ties in nicely to the whole aeronautical theme of this conversation as well.
Yeah, definitely. Because I was talking with a commercial pilot the other day, and he said to me the fastest twin prop aircraft is still the Saab 2000 plane aircraft.
There you go.
And I was like, wow. And some countries are still flying it. Not Great Britain, but yeah. Okay, all right, Shazad. Thanks for coming on our podcast. It was a great talk, and had lots of fun doing it. Hopefully, we can do it again, and hopefully this year, if the lockdown allows us, we can meet up at a car show or something and have
that would be awesome. I'd love that.
Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe on Shazad's social media outlets, which I'm going to tell you. Well, you're going to tell me where to find you.
It's very easy. I mean, you can search for me on all social media networks by just searching for #BrownCarGuy. Make sure you head over to youtube.com/BrownCarGuy and hit the subscribe button on my videos. And of course, you can also go to browncarguy.com, which you can see behind me on the website there. Yeah,
and you've got Patreon site as well?
I do, absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for mentioning that. Patreon.com/BrownCarGuy. Pretty much Brown Car Guy everywhere.
Yeah, cool. Okay, well, look, thanks for your time. I've had a lot of fun. I could talk to you all day, but I've got another podcast waiting on the other side. So take care and we'll catch up, okay?
Much appreciated. Thanks for having me, and it's been a lot of fun. Take care,
Yes, thank you. Cheers. Bye-bye.